Hello, welcome to the second lecture of the course Demystifying the Brain. This lecture is about understanding the brain shape. So, we all know from our high school biology that the brain has two hemispheres. There is a little long tail like organ called the spinal cord, and then you have pons, medulla and cerebellum, and so you learn all these anatomical features of the brain. If you are a medical student and taking a course on neuroscience, you might even be learning details like which part of the brain processes vision, which part processes touch and audition and motor function and things like that, and you will memorize all these facts and and reproduce them in the exams. But this course is not about memorizing the details of the brain. This course is about the principles of the brain, the neural information processing principles of the brain. So, particularly in this lecture we will only try to understand the structural principles of the brain. So, we will try to ask what are the evolutionary forces that shape the brain and made it the way it is today. So, in this lecture there are three segments. In the first lecture we will try to see if there is any correlation between brain size and intelligence, because one of the things we would like to understand about brain is why is it so intelligent, what is it so special about it that makes it so intelligent. So, is there any connection with any of the structural properties of the brain. So, in segment 2 we will invoke this principle called the save wire principle. So, brain takes a lot of pains to make sure that the total wire in the brain is minimum. So, there is a strong evolutionary pressure to minimize the wire length in the brain, and we will also try to argue how it is related to a similar thing that we do in engineering. Engineers also very often especially electrical engineers who design circuits try to minimize the total wire length. So, in the third segment we will study brain's evolution. So, we will look at nervous systems of very simple creatures and go all the way to vertebrates, invertebrates, mammals, and then finally humans, right, and then see how brain has evolved, and we will try to show how a very simple structural principle, the save wire principle, can explain a lot of features of the brain's evolution. So, let us start with the first question, brain size and intelligence. Right. So, let us start with a simple story. Right. So, the moment you think of intelligence, the first name that pops into your mind is probably that of Albert Einstein. So, he is one of the greatest geniuses of our times, and so you would often wonder what makes him so intelligent, how come he is able to think so differently from everybody else. So, people have even gone to the length of asking is his brain something different. I mean, what is special about Einstein's brain? So, after Einstein's death his brain was removed, I think with his permission from his son. This was done by a person called Thomas Harvey, a pathologist at Princeton Hospital. It was dissected roughly into 240 blocks, each of about 10 cubic centimeters size, and then it was preserved in a plastic like material called celloidin. And so, a lot of structural anatomical studies were done on these blocks, and there is a lot of story about how these blocks went from place to place, and people have several groups have studied these blocks and so on and so forth. I will not get into the history of what happened to Einstein's brain, but to explain the findings of these studies I would first like to introduce a few terms to explain the features of brain's anatomy. So, brain as we know has two hemispheres. This you might have learnt in your high school, and each hemisphere has several lobes. So, for example, the blue region that you are looking at is the frontal lobe, the yellow region is the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe is the green region, and the pink region is the occipital lobe. So, okay, and then we should also mention a few directions, because we will use these terms again and again. As you know, biology is a lot to do with jargon, although when you try to understand principles, I mean jargon is not that important, but anyway just to connect with biological literature we will introduce and define the jargon. So, directions up means superior or dorsal, and down means inferior or ventral, and front means rostral, rostrum is nose. So, that is rostral is front, and anterior is also front. Caudal, cauda means tail, so caudal is back, and so posterior is also back. Okay. So, then you have so medial is in the center or middle, and lateral is to the side, then bilateral is on both sides. Ipsilateral is on the same side as something that we are discussing, and contralateral is on the opposite side. Now, the section, there is a coronal plane which cuts through the brain vertically like this, parallel to the plane of the face, and the horizontal plane cuts the brain so that the plane is horizontal, parallel to the horizontal, and the sagittal plane is cuts the brain in the vertical plane like this, and the mid sagittal plane cuts the brain exactly in the middle. Now, brain is basically a big network, right? It is a network of neurons. So, there are the nodes in the network, and then there are the connections or the edges. Now, in this network of the brain, the nodes are basically masses of neurons, the cell bodies of the neurons, and the edges are the neural fibers. Now, as it is typical in biology, these same things go by many names. For example, nodes are often nodes which are like masses of neurons are called nucleus, for example, if they are deep inside the brain. We also call them gray matter, and then the cortex, which is the surface of the brain, which is a 2 to 5 millimeter thick sheet of neurons, right. That's again that has a lot of neuron cell bodies. Then there are ganglia, which are in the autonomous system. There's little masses of neurons, and the edges or wire also go by many names. There are tracts, peduncles, fasciculi, nerves, and so on and so forth. Okay, so basically, it's a brain is a network with nodes and edges. Nodes are masses of neurons which go by all these names, and the edges are wires which also go by many names. So, what is special about Einstein's brain? What are the main findings of these studies? The first feature that they found is that Einstein's parietal operculum region was missing. So, what is this parietal operculum? So, operculum means lid in Latin. So, this particular region is called the parietal operculum. Okay, what exactly is going on here? So, if you go back to the previous slide where we saw the lobes, right. So, you have this fissure between the frontal lobe and the temporal lobe. It is called a Sylvian fissure, and then you have another fissure which is running vertically, that is called a central fissure. So, the Sylvian fissure usually goes beyond the central fissure and penetrates the parietal and the temporal areas up to a point. Now, in Einstein's brain, so the part of the Sylvian fissure is actually missing, and also if you open the brain right at the Sylvian fissure, right, you will see a kind of a cave like cavity, and that is what you are looking at here, and this roof is the parietal operculum. So, this parietal operculum region was missing in Einstein's brain. Secondly, the Sylvian fissure was also partly absent, right, and the third feature is that the inferior parietal lobe was 15% wider than normal. So, so the parietal lobe, again if you go back to this figure, right. So, this is the parietal lobe, and so this is the inferior part of or lower part of the parietal lobe, and this part is wider than normal. So, this is actual figure of Einstein's brain, and so you can see here that so this is the inferior parietal lobe, right, and this region is wider than normal people in Einstein's brain. The last feature is actually a cellular feature. So, in brain, in addition to neurons, there is a second category of cells called the glial cells, and so for a long time people thought that glial cells only perform some kind of a miscellaneous functions, just supporting the function of neurons. But work done over the last 2.5 decades has shown that glial cells also participate in neural information processing. They work along with neurons and and perform information processing. So, in Einstein's brain, in the left inferior parietal area, people have found there are 73% more glial cells than normal brains. So, what we can conclude is that Einstein's brain is slightly different from a normal brain, but it is nothing dramatic. I mean, so for all the intelligence that the scientist has exhibited in his work, this brain is not that different from the brain of a typical person. So, where do we start? Okay, so let us go further, and let us not be too disappointed with this result, and let us look at some more like cerebral vital statistics, some more basic structural properties of the brain, and see if we can find some correlation with intelligence. So, one of the first things that you can think of about brain, right, is its size or its weight, right. Are larger brains smarter? Okay, so let us look at the weights of various organisms, various species, and see if the size correlates with intelligence in any sense. So, the weight of a newborn human is about 300 grams to 400 grams. An adult human who is all educated and has gone to college and has a degree, I am just kidding, has a weight of about 1.3 to 1.4 kilos. Then the elephant has pretty large brain, that is about 4.7 kilos, right, and dolphin is a very smart animal that has about 1.5 to 1.6 kilos, very pretty close to, and in fact slightly larger than human brain. Then the fin whales, generally all the whale species have very large brains. In fact, they have the largest brains in the animal world. So, that is 6.9 kilos, then a gorilla has about half a kilo brain. If you look at other monkeys like rhesus monkey has about 100 grams brain, and cow has about half a kilo, a cat is 30 grams, and so if you look at a viper, it has a very tiny brain, only 0.1 grams. Okay, so if you think that brain's intelligence is correlated with the brain's weight, and it does not work very well, because you would assume that humans we assume that humans are most intelligent, therefore we would expect us to have the largest brain, but that is not true, right. Elephants and whales have much larger brains than us. So, therefore, brain size does not indicate intelligence. Okay, then what do we do? So, in fact, you might complain that the situation is a lot like what you see in this cartoon, because here all these animals are asked to perform the same task, take the same exam. So, what this guy is saying is, for a fair selection everybody has to take the same exam, please climb the tree. So, what we have done just now is probably something like that, you might complain. So, that is not fair, because so thing is, a large animal would need a larger brain, right, to control that huge body. Okay, so, for example, if you comparing whale's brain with human brain is not fair, you might say, because a human body weight is about 70 kilos and brain weight is 1.3 kilos, whereas a sperm whale is like a huge hunk, right, has about 35 to 57 tons of body weight, whereas the brain weight is only 7.8 kilos. So, maybe just comparing the raw weight of the brains is not fair, you should probably compare brain weight as a ratio of some body weight. So, let us do just that, and then let us look at some data. So, this quantity called brain weight by body weight is called E by S ratio. E stands for encephalon, which means head or the brain, and S stands for soma or the body. So, let us look at the E by S ratios of several species. So, birds have this ratio of about 1 by 12 and humans 1 by 40. Mouse, right, has about same value as ours, so 1 by 40, and cat is 1 by 100, dogs 1 by 125, and so on and so forth. Hippopotamus, right, by virtue of its large corporeal frame, right, has a very small E by S ratio, and so on. So, what we conclude from the E by S ratio data is that bird brains are smarter. Now, when you call somebody a bird brain, it's you treat it as an insult, but here by the measure of E by S ratio, birds turn out to be the smartest, right, and mouse is just as smart as humans, and brain weight in certain vertebrates does not generally appear to increase linearly with body weight. Also, many smaller mammals have larger E by S ratios than that of humans. So, something has gone wrong again, and then we need to conclude that perhaps E by S ratio is not a very good index of intelligence. Okay. So, then can we go further, can we make a small correction to make it more sensible? So, what people have thought is, maybe we should not assume that E and S are proportional, maybe there is a power law relating E and S. Okay. How did people arrive at that idea? The arguments go something like this, right. Imagine your body is like a sphere. I mean, no offense, because mathematicians like to idealize things and compare real world objects with ideal geometric objects. So, just for sake of mathematical simplicity, let us assume that the body is like a sphere, and inside this large spherical body, somewhere in the center, let us assume there is a small spherical brain, and now which is this brain is just a mass of neurons, and these neurons are sending out their axons, their wires, right, and to innervate the entire body and reaching all the way to the surface of the body, which is the surface of the sphere. So, the brain has to innervate the entire surface of the spherical body, right. The greater the surface area, the more the number of fibers that the brain has to send out to the surface, and the more the number of fibers, the more the number of neurons that the brain has to have, and more the number of neurons, the greater the brain weight. Okay. So, the argument here is that body weight is proportional to the volume of the sphere, which is assuming the density is constant, right. So, therefore, the volume of the sphere is 4 by 3 pi r cube, okay, whereas the brain weight is since it is the number of fibers is proportional to the surface area, and surface area of the sphere is 4 pi r square, right. So, therefore, brain weight is supposed to be proportional to 4 pi r square. So, if you assume this, if you buy this argument, then you have to accept that the brain weight E is proportional to the body weight S to the power of 2 by 3. So, you have some kind of power law relating brain weight and body weight. So, then people decide to fit this kind of a power law to the brain and body weights of real animals, right, various species. So E is equal to some constant, proportionality constant C times s to the power of r, where r is the exponent which is equal to 2 by 3 or 0.66, and C is the cephalization factor. It tells you how much that animal is cephalized, or right, is endowed with a brain. Now you take, so people have fitted this kind of formula to different species. They did not just fit a common formula to all the species, because that does not make sense. So they have fitted this formula to various individual species. So for example, if you fit this formula to the average animal, you get some value of C, and that is called the C average mammal. Okay, then fit it to some other species which you want to compare with the average mammals, the mammals, right, and then you get a different C. So now take the ratio of the C that you get from your test species and with the C of the mammals, right. So you get C by C average mammal, and this quantity is called the encephalization quotient or EQ of that species. So this abbreviation EQ is slightly misleading, because it sounds like IQ, but actually as of now it does not really correlate with IQ. We do not know, we cannot say anything at the moment, but that is the kind of abbreviation that is used. So what does this EQ mean? If a species has an EQ of 2.0, it means that its brain is twice as large as expected for a mammal of comparable weight. Okay, so this is how this EQ is measured and defined. So in this figure you have the body weight and the brain weight. Brain weight is shown in grams, body weight is in kilograms, and both are shown in log scale, because that is when you get since you have power law, if you express both these quantities in log scale, you get a linear fit. So they fitted that, and you see the kind of two polygons in this figure, and the top polygon is for higher vertebrates, right, and the bottom polygon is for the lower vertebrates, and the C value for higher vertebrates turns out to be 0.07, and the C value for lower vertebrates turns out to be 0.007. So you get this kind of different C values, right. Take these quotients and then calculate EQs, and let us see what you got. So for humans or for man, the EQ is 7.44, for dolphins it is 5.31, for a chimpanzee, which is a very smart animal, it is 2.49. Dolphin is also a pretty smart animal. The monkey is 2.09, and so all these primates, right, these are considered very smart. So all of them have a high EQ, high EQ values, with humans having the highest, and then elephant 1.87, and so on and so forth. The rabbit has 0.4, and so on and so forth. So all these kind of analysis are taken from this book by McPhail. So where do we stand? I mean, so we have looked at, so we started with some simplistic measures, trying to correlate brain structural properties like weight and weight, brain weight to body weight ratio, and so on. We have tried to correlate these quantities with intelligence, but it did not work out. So then we defined this kind of a strange quantity called EQ, and it worked well. It kind of it confirmed our intuitive ideas about who is most intelligent, and so therefore for humans EQ is highest. So what is the conclusion? So the thing is, EQ is not very convincing, because it seems like kind of some kind of a fit, right. So we already pre-decided who is most intelligent, and you have come up with some kind of a measure which confirms that kind of intuitive belief. So maybe we need to go further, because these measures that we have looked at in this segment of the lecture are gross structural features, right. Maybe we should look at the microscopic structural properties of the nervous system to really understand what is it that makes the brain intelligent. Thank you.